Hi, Mage fans. This is your host, Terry Robinson, and before we get to this week's conversation with Ian A.A. Watson, I have a community note. In this episode, Ian and I talk about doing an event to update the Unofficial White Wolf Wiki and add a bunch of missing Mage stuff to it. And well, we're going to run such an event. Starting at midnight UTC on July 4th, that's 8 p.m. Eastern for those in the US, we are going to do a wiki sprint to see how many Mage the Ascension articles we can add and update in 3 hours. There is a channel in the Mage the Podcast Discord, discord.me/MageThePodcast, where we're collecting articles that need to be created and updated, and several participants will receive some random Mage memorabilia, like maybe some of my custom laser-cut Mage quintessence counters, and a few other things. To participate, just post a link to the article that you added or materially improved between July 4th and July 7th in the Discord or on Facebook, and you'll be entered. Link to the Facebook group and to the Discord are in the show notes. And with that, on with the show. Ian A.A. Watson, how you doing?
Doing okay, thanks. My game just came out, and people seem to be enjoying it, so I'm happy.
So what is your game?
My game is the Trinity Continuum, which is a new edition of the Trinity, Aberrant, and Adventure games that White Wolf released starting in 1997.
I know those are broken up across time periods, and I think there's a core book. So what is the relationship between that adventure, the Aberrant, the Aeon, and the Continuum? I'm never quite sure about which one's which.
The Trinity Continuum core rules is a new thing that we did with this edition. It's a modern-day action-adventure setting, so if you want to do Leverage or Eureka or Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., that sort of game, you can do that right with the core. Then there's Aeon, which is the far future setting, 2120s. You play a Scion. It's sort of a kitchen sink science fiction setting, I should say. And the feel of it is very Mass Effect, except 10 years before Mass Effect came out. It was released in sort of a reverse chronological order, and we're doing the same thing this time. Aberrant is set about 20 years in the future, or 10 or 20 years in the future. It's a superhero RPG, but, with our own little twist on it. And then there was Adventure with the exclamation point, which was set in the 1920s, and that was more of a pulp thing. So all of that is part of the same continuum.
And that is a shared world across it. It's kind of like Dark Age Vampire informs V20.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So, and they all kind of talk to each other. There are characters or references that pop up across it with a shared history. And what system is that running on top of? Because I remember picking up Aberrant at some point and being like, you have 174 points of dexterity. You roll 72 million dice because you have mega dexterity or something like that.
The new system we're using is the Storypath system, which is Onyx Path's. It's our new in-house system. It's clearly related to the Storyteller system, but it still uses D10s, and it's still attribute plus skill, but it's much more narratively inclined. So there's no more rolling buckets of dice like you might in Exalted.
And is it one of those things where every time I want to punch someone that involves 4 rolls, where I roll to attack, they roll to dodge, I roll for damage, and they roll for soak? Or is it streamlined beyond that?
Oh, it's much more streamlined.
Interesting. So if you had to say to a mage storyteller who says, hey, I like the old World of Darkness world and I love mage, but I'm looking for a new core system just to kind of smooth things out and make it go faster, are there any things about the Storypath system that you think are particularly good at keeping a game moving or tying together story with, I guess you could say, character? In Old World of Darkness, my character's a librarian, but I have a strength of 9 or something like that. There was nothing tying those two together. Is there anything in the Storypath system that you think does either of those things particularly well?
The Path system, which obviously named because Storypath, that sort of defines. There's, for example, your origin path. How did you grow up? What did you do? What sort of people did you know? You could also have, from the core rulebook, we have your allegiance. So whichever organization you're a part of, all of these things sort of inform what skills or abilities you might possess. So it's not just a straight, okay, I have a blank sheet, I have a bunch of points to assign, where am I going to put them? But, for example, if you come from if you have a job as a police officer, obviously you're going to have more skills in firearms. You might be better at intimidation. So the path you come from sort of helps contribute to the sort of character you're building.
Interesting. And I assume there's some sort of room on top of that so you can have your quirky police officer and such.
Oh, absolutely. So, like, any like three police officer characters are not going to look remotely alike. It's one of the building blocks to help create a character.
Got it. But chances are they will deviate from the standard mortal in possibly similar ways, and that's what this path system does.
Right.
Interesting. Does it introduce any mechanisms to kind of keep it moving? I'm familiar with momentum in Scion. Does it use something similar, or?
Well, Scion also, it was our first game using the Storypath system.
Okay.
So across all of the Storypath games, the same core momentum system is still in use.
What does momentum do within the game? It seems to be part of kind of a modern movement in games to have some sort of shared resource that either a storyteller or path guide or whatever the term of art is in this game for the person who kind of provides setting and NPCs to either bribe characters to do things or to kind of accumulate a resource with defeat. Does it serve a similar goal here?
Yeah. In sort of the action-adventure genre that we're emulating, just straight failure, well, with the storyteller system, since it's more of a horror thing, the failure itself is interesting. That's where you want to sort of almost like focus a lot of your attention. Okay. In action-adventure, it's almost the opposite. I'm not so interested in failure. I'm more interested in, like, okay, I know you're going to stop Baron von Bad Guy, but how are you going to stop him?
How bumpy is the path up Mount Success going to be?
Right. Like, are you going to alert the guards to your location? That's interesting. You haven't failed, but you've made things harder for yourself. So
builds tension as opposed to building despair, as the old World of Darkness failure system may be. Okay.
And another thing I really like about this system is that even if you're not contributing direct successes, so like, okay, you're not punching the bad guys, you're not hacking the mainframe, you're screwing up and you're just making things harder, but you're adding momentum to the shared momentum pool of the group. So you're still contributing to making things better for everyone, even if you yourself are failing.
Okay. So if Jane hadn't fucked up, we wouldn't have had those 2 points of momentum that we needed to do blank.
Exactly.
And what do you use momentum for? So it's a resource that builds up. Is momentum spent? Is that a way of putting it? Okay.
Momentum, it sort of takes the place in many ways to when you spend willpower in the storyteller system.
Okay.
Where you would spend willpower to get extra dice, or in the storytelling system, you get extra successes, or vice versa.
Something like that.
Yes. In one of them, yeah. Sorry, I try to keep like 6 different versions of the same core system in my head.
Fully understood. So in the storytelling system, you can do one
storytelling system.
Yes, you can do one or more of those things.
It's either like extra dice or extra successes, and it works very similarly to that, where you get what we call enhancement. Enhancement doesn't kick in unless you already have at least one success, but otherwise it's basically extra successes on top.
Now, is that similar to exceptional successes in Chronicles of Darkness, or enhancements kind of something different?
Let me put it this way. Let's say I have +2 enhancement to a roll. If I get 0 successes, that +2 enhancement does not kick in at all. It's useless. Okay. If I get at least 1 success, then the enhancement kicks in. So I have 3 successes.
Okay. And those 3 successes within the system, I can use that for various things.
Yes. Whereas in storytelling, the successes directly translate like, okay, I've got, I do 3 successes on this damage roll, so I do 3 damage to you. Mm-hmm. In this case, it's more like another resource to spend. So if I'm trying to damage you, the first point could go into damage, and then the second could go into, say, blinding you because, I've, kicked up a bunch of dust into your face or something.
Okay.
Or a grapple attack or something like that. Something interesting on top of just, okay, you have damage done to you.
Now, does this system have anything to deal with what I call the unnecessary blowout, which sounds like a euphemism for somebody having their pants ripped? But I have a character who's trying to break into someone's house. So they roll dexterity plus larceny. And it's difficulty 7 or 8 because there's a security system, and this person blows a point of willpower, and they did prep, and they wind up with 9 successes. But to get in, they needed 1. Does Storypath have anything that they do with extra successes over what you needed?
Yes, those extra successes can be spent on stunts, where it's just like doing damage, where kicking dust into your face or grappling someone, those are more combat stunts.
Mm-hmm.
In this case, you break into someone's house, and you've managed to, like, the way you do it, you've managed to install a backdoor into their security system, so you can enter anytime you want in the future without setting off the alarms.
So it seems like it's very much this thing, the game wants you to make it to the top of the mountain, and it doesn't want you to feel as if you've wasted resources to get an exceptional success, nor does it want to make you feel like a failure is, we need to go back to the last save point and try something else different. Right. It seems to want to preserve those things. So this sounds fascinating. And since there is a core rulebook, if I am just a old World of Darkness person who's like, I just want a different core book, which book do I then need to get if I just want the basics then of the Storypath system and maybe a modern day setting?
That would be the Trinity Continuum core rulebook.
And that one is out. I can go to Amazon. I can get that in a gorgeous offset print copy that is not this dumpster fire that is print on demand. I appreciate that print on demand exists, but it just does not hold a candle to something that has proper end tabs on it.
Yes, you can get it. I believe it's on Amazon. Any retailers who have ordered it, they have it in stores now. If they don't have it, they can order it from their standard distribution network, because I think Alliance orders from Studio 2.
Yeah.
Studio 2, like, you can order it directly from Studio 2 yourself. You can order it from Indie Press Revolution, and of course, it's in PDF print on demand on drive-thru.
Awesome. I'm super jazzed that we have these gorgeous offset print books that exist in stores again. Hopefully, it's not a complete marketing flop, but at least I am glad that they exist.
Well, I certainly hope people buy it, because, I mean, I spent a long time making this, let me tell you, and I'm just delighted to have it out in front of people.
And I look forward to playing it in eventually.
Thank you.
So, as you had mentioned, you are a game writer or a game developer. Apologies if I'm using the wrong title. How did you first start to work for Onyx Path or White Wolf?
Okay, that's going back a few years. My first contributions with White Wolf were as a fan, and round about 2000, I was one of the people picked to be one of the storytellers on their New Bremen chat.
What was that?
It was a Java-based, essentially just text chat where people could create characters and log in and just sort of join this. It was basically a mush, if anyone's familiar.
So I imagine it's online. There's no system, I imagine. So it's almost like, I guess you could say, being at a LARP, where it's just a large text-based community. You're not there in person, but you're having conversations maybe in character. Maybe there's different rooms for different areas of a gaming world. Is that a accurate way to put it? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of the old Palace system that existed years ago, if that is something within your memory.
It is, yes.
Okay, so you were a storyteller for that. Was that a case of you had to come up with plot, or were you more kind of a referee?
I didn't come up with a whole lot of plot myself, but I was in charge of the mage team, appropriately enough.
Woo!
I was the head mage storyteller, and after about a year of that, I became the head storyteller for all of New Bremen, and then I moved on. There were about, I would say, 6,000 to 8,000 characters, like active characters in the database at any given time, so it was popping.
6,000, 8,000. And I mean, with that many people, that means there were probably 9 people there or more that weren't playing Vampire. So that made one of the largest non-vampire communities on the face of the planet. I see you are also credited with in Guide to the Traditions and Mage 20th Anniversary Edition. What were your roles in those?
Actually, the Guide to the Traditions came about because of New Bremen. Jess Haynig, who was the mage developer at the time, mm-hmm. He was also a storyteller on New Bremen, although he decided he didn't want to interrupt what I was doing, so he was a vampire storyteller. But he said, okay, Ian, you're a mage person. Here's some of the stuff I'm planning on putting in the Guide to the Traditions. What do you think? So I gave him some of my feedback, and he gave me my first credit in the RPG industry by crediting me for additional contributions.
When that book came in and you cracked it open, did he slap you on the back and go, "You're a wizard, Ian"?
No, but that would have been fabulous. But I was stoked just to see my name in the book.
Yeah.
At the time, that was the largest supplement White Wolf had ever made, and there was my name in it.
And informally among the fans, it's known as the Widowmaker because of its size. That's not true. I just call things the Widowmaker. So you did a brief stint with Mage, and your name has popped up a couple cases. You've done the convention books. You did Mage 20th anniversary. Do you have an ongoing relationship with Mage the Ascension? No is a perfectly valid answer.
We flirt at each other from across the room. I'm not as involved as I. There were times I thought I'd be much more involved than I am, but I'm a Trinity guy now.
Yeah. Is it safe to say though that maybe you were good friends with Mage in college, and then you and Mage moved, and you said you'd keep in touch, and you don't, but you do like each other's life events on like Facebook or LinkedIn. And maybe if you were visiting the other person's city, you'd probably get coffee and talk about the good old times, but you're probably never going to do that trip to Europe that you had planned.
Yeah, I don't think any trips to Europe are in the cards. Some people in the polyamory community might be familiar with the term comet, where one of your partners isn't around a whole lot. You get together when you are. You sort of, split off and go your own separate ways. And it might be a couple of years before you see each other again. And you just sort of rekindle that flame for that brief moment, and then you get apart again.
So I do like the idea that Trinity and Mage are metamors vicariously through the development community. I think that's it's one of those things where I appreciate the usage of the term polycule. I just hate the sound in my mouth. And
it has an awkward mouthfeel.
In the same way I don't like the word juicy. But both words are very useful in their own little contexts. Speaking of open relationships, you are currently the community manager for Onyx Path, correct?
Yes.
What does that mean?
Well, it started when I had already accepted Rich's overture for, like, hey, I bought the Trinity universe. Do you want to do something with that?
Hey, look what I got at this yard sale. Yeah.
And then early 2012, he said, like, Ian, we've got this thing called Onyx Path. We're not telling anyone about it yet, but we need someone to do a website. Do you do websites? I said, yeah, I can run your website for you. I can run your Twitter. I can run your Facebook. And he said, all right. And that was pretty much it. That I just sort of almost accidentally stumbled/forced my way into it. And they've just sort of let me do my thing ever since then.
Oh, awesome. So right now you kind of maintain their social media presences as well as just kind of making sure that the pro forma stuff of keeping a blog up to date occurs?
Yep, pretty much.
Awesome. So to give the audience a sneak peek, normally when I'm trying to contact a creator or writer, it's like a 4-step process of finding their personal webpage or finding a friend that knows a friend. And you were doing an interview with Chaz Kellner, a chum of mine. I'm like, get Ian's email address. And little did I know you were literally one of 2 people. You are half the people whose email address is just flat out listed on the Onyx Path's webpage. So
yes. There is, if you go to the Onyx Path website and you click on the contact button at the bottom, there's Rich, there's me, and then there's sort of the general Onyx Path email address, which goes to Matt McElroy.
In addition to that, the big thing that I would like to talk about, if we may, is your role as the creator, founder, I'm not quite sure what term to use, of the Unofficial White Wolf Wiki.
Yes.
What is the Unofficial White Wolf Wiki?
Well, it's a wiki where I'm sure just about everyone listening to this has at some point Googled something related to Mage or one of the other World of Darkness games, and one of the first results they're probably going to end up on is the White Wolf Wiki. And that's my baby. I put that together.
So you probably have several thousand articles to your name in there, and as your other jobs have kind of ramped up, is the Unofficial White Wolf Wiki still kind of your baby, or is that a project that kind of went onto the back burner?
I mean, the whole point of a wiki is that it's a community project, right? You put it up there and you hope that people are going to contribute, and lucky for me, it did catch on. Not all of my projects have. You create a project, you think everyone's going to love this, and no one cares. And this was not one of those, and I'm so thankful it's still around after 15 years. And I still contribute to it from time to time, but for the most part, it's the communities now.
Now, this is the White Wolf Wiki. Does it include anything beyond COD and WOD?
It's World of Darkness, Chronicles of Darkness, Exalted, and there is content from Ars Magica there up to, I think, 3rd edition, which is when it got handed off to Wizards of the Coast. And there's also material from Scion and the Trinity universe from when White Wolf still owned it. At the point when it moves on to a different company, that's when it's no longer a White Wolf thing. So previous content belongs on the wiki, but anything after that does not.
Okay, so I would not go through and add articles on the Manituo or something from the Scion Hero or any of the new books.
Correct.
Is there going to be a wiki to cover those materials at all, or is that for some other person to come along and do?
Well, actually, I do have an Onyx Path wiki. It's the onyxpath.fandom.com instead of whitewolf.fandom.com. It doesn't have a lot of contributions because I haven't really advertised the fact that it exists. But, I've put up a little bit of a framework for it. So if anyone would like to contribute, I'm certainly not going to argue.
And that would cover all of the Onyx Path specific stuff where Onyx Path directly holds the license?
Yes.
Okay, cool beans. So us mage folk will still be contributing to the Unofficial White Wolf Wiki into the foreseeable future until Richard Thomas wins the World of Darkness licenses from Paradox, I assume in a very high-stakes game of poker.
Yes, absolutely.
That's kind of what I'm hoping for. So it's this massive, gorgeous, sprawling piece of work. How do you figure out what you can actually post, considering that it's a wiki that consists entirely of copyrighted material?
I avoid copying things directly from the book. I try to keep things as concise as possible. So if one of my sort of pet projects on the wiki has been timeline stuff. So if there's a date attached to an event, like someone mentions something has happened, I will just try to make that as concise as possible, like a single sentence reference. Department 37 is founded to investigate undead activity in Chicago. Boom, there, that's on the wiki. So that in and of itself isn't really copyrighted. That's just information. So no one at White Wolf has ever really come after me for everything that's there. So like the most they've said is, hey, make sure you have unofficial in the title and make sure you have this little logo on it. And otherwise, they're happy with it as it is.
And it seems like there was kind of a peak level of activity seemingly between like 2007 and seeming like 2012. When did this thing start?
I founded it in 2005, I think. So about a year after the Chronicles of Darkness started. And then I spent a lot of my free time just going through the books I had and updating the wiki accordingly. And 2012 is about the time I got the job at Onyx Path, so that would make sense why there might have been that drop-off point.
Yeah, it's one of those things where a wiki, even though it is a community thing, it's one of those things where, 95% of people will simply look at it, 4% will make one or two edits, and then you have this core 1% that is going through and religiously adding every art that has ever appeared in a Changeling book, and
right,
including
exactly.
footnotes to it. I guess, where would you like to see it go?
Well, there are a lot of red links on there. The fewer red links, the better. So I would just love to see my optimal view of what the wiki is would be a complete reference to everything in a White Wolf book. So for every single mention of a name or a location or an event or a power or whatever is at least has, a small article saying what it is. At the moment, I would like the page I'm looking at, it's half to 2/3 red links, which is articles that don't exist. So I just want it to be that complete resource. I know that may not be particularly feasible. I mean, the rate at which new articles are created might be, counteracted by the number of books that are being released creating that new information. But, that's sort of the dream, the end goal. It's nice to have sort of that aim to reach for.
So if Mage, the podcast, wanted to start a wiki project where we said, hey, there's a particular portion of the wiki that we think as a community we can kind of fill in, do you have any recommendations on where we should start?
Ooh, that is a good question. I would say pick one of the tradition pages that you like and look for red links on those tradition pages and see if there's any information you can fill out.
Okay, so I'm going to the Sons of Aether page, and one of the red links that pops out is the Pupils of Parmenides. outside the guild's influence. Is there any corner that is too small, that is too niche for someone to want to fill in? So a lot of the books, for instance, are filled with, it may have a list of organizations. They are never filled out or expanded on anywhere. They are just kind of provided as a list of favorite flavorful names. Should those things also have articles attached to them as just a house within the Sons of Ether or something like that?
Like, if that's all the information that exists, then yeah, sure, create an article for it. If someone is Googling pupils of Parmenides for whatever reason, just to find out what information exists, I would rather they stumble across an article that says pupils of Parmenides rather than, have to dig their way through the Sons of Ether article.
And I guess my other question is, I am uncomfortable with how useful the drive-through RPG feature of search through all the books I already own is. The number of arguments I've settled with, this is the only place this is referenced. I'm like, nope, I literally own all the PDFs. These are the 4 references to it. Is it the case that if someone is going to fill in one of those red pages, that you would rather see it complete? Or is it comfortable that someone just does something incrementally, where we find that first reference of people of Parmenides, someone adds it, and then someone adds something else later? Or would you recommend a new person just be like, hey, these are all the references, let's jam them in there?
You know what? If you're the sort of person where you have all the references at hand, by all means, create as full an article as you can. Okay. If you only have one book that has one tiny reference, just stick that in. Do whatever you are comfortable with.
Are there any generally recognized leaders for any of the lines? Like, for instance, the front page has recent publications. That has not been updated recently for the newest books to come out. Is that something also that anyone can more or less do? Or is there a traditional person that's in charge of that you're looking for? Someone who is willing to take over just updating that particular aspect of it? Do you feel there's any benefit to specialization if someone is looking to help?
If someone wants to sort of take a small job, like, I'm going to keep this one thing updated, and you stick to it, please do that. If that is a thing you want to do, please do it.
One of my personal projects is, it galls me anytime we find out that a historical figure was also secretly a vampire or secretly a mage. Right. So I started compiling the list of historical figures in Mage the Ascension, and we find out that almost all of them are technocrats. So whenever I am doing a book review for the show and it says, oh, by the way, Newton was a void engineer or something like that, I kind of try and drop that in. And that's kind of my side project like that. So if you, listener, have something similar to that you would like to do, by all means do so. Are there any trends that you notice in terms of what the wanted pages are? Is this something where people are looking for mechanics or setting stuff or anything in particular?
I try to keep mechanics off the wiki as much as I can. If I'm describing, say, how a sphere operates, I'll describe the effect and not so much the mechanics, because narratively what a sphere does is pretty much the same regardless, but from edition to edition it can change wildly. And also when you include mechanics, that starts getting into that gray area of copyright infringement, and I want to stay away from that.
Okay, so we can more or less include any of the setting information we want, but as long as we generally steer clear of too specific a mechanic. Like, we don't want tables to suddenly appear in terms of contested difficulty tables or something like that.
Right, yeah. On a page for, say, the storyteller system, sure, give the basic mechanics on how the storyteller system works, but yeah, I please stay away from just verbatim copying books. We want people to buy books. Telling people how systems work such that they don't need books please don't do that.
So you talked about not wanting to necessarily add systems to it. A number of games nowadays are providing SRDs or some sort of document that says this is how the system works and this is how it's designed. Do you know of that happening at all in the Storypath or storytellering systems?
White Wolf owns Storyteller and storytelling. Anything that they do in that regard is up to them. Okay. They do have the Storyteller's Vault, the community content system on DriveThruRPG. So if you do want to create your own supplement or fiction or anything else to do with Mage or any of the World of Darkness or Chronicles of Darkness or Exalted games, you can make your own supplement, stick it on the Storyteller's Vault, and make money off of it. We're doing the same thing with the Storypath system on the Storypath Nexus. Right now there's just Scion on it, but now that the Trinity Continuum has dropped, that will soon be unlocked on the Nexus as well.
Okay. And if someone wanted to do a Pain in the Dice book, basically a quick and dirty reference to the entire system, that would be kosher to put on there, assuming that the person reworded it and wasn't just stealing massive clumps of text from a core rulebook.
Right. Word things in your own way. Don't steal material and sell it, because that's no good. And each of these community content sites does have like their list of rules and guidelines on how to properly make a thing. So, for example, the way we do things on the Nexus might not necessarily be the same way that the Storyteller's Vault does things, because it's being run by different people. So just make sure you follow those rules when you're making a supplement, and you should be cool.
As someone who has now kind of given birth, as it were, to a relaunch of a world, now that community content sites exist, does that in any way affect the design? The idea that's where you say, hey, we're going to make a reference to this region of space, and we're never going to really flesh it out. But if storytellers want to write their own supplements that say, this is what is beyond this jump gate, or this is what's in this cave, they can do so. Is it just strictly a byproduct of writing, or is it something that you take into consideration at all in the creating of the material in the first place?
It is a bit freeing. The core rulebook for Aeon, for example, didn't really go, because we have limits on word count. So we didn't go into a lot of detail on, for example, Central America. And people have asked, are you going to cover Central America? And I don't think we're going to be able to, unfortunately.
What does that mean when you say don't think you'll be able to, unfortunately? Sorry. Like, is that just economic considerations, or?
Yeah, our book Terra Firma coming up, which is a book of Earth going into details on various individual countries and regions. We just don't have the space to be able to go into some places like Central America. So Central America is essentially, it's territory right for people to go into the sort of detail they want. So it's unfortunate from my end that we're not going to be able to do that, but it's okay almost, because I know there's this space for fans to be able to fill in that kind of information if they want to.
Is that something where you then need to signal to the fan community that says, hey, we're probably not going to do anything here? I know a number of people that have projects that they would like to do for the Storyteller Vault for Mage, but maybe they're reticent to do so because, I heard a rumor that White Wolf may approve a book on this topic, and I don't want to do my 40-page fan version of what the Shard Realms are like if Bricado is going to come along and do an official version. Is that something that you broadcast at all, or?
I don't, because I don't, for my part, I'm not too worried about that sort of thing.
Okay.
If someone wants to do their own version of an Orgotech source book, here's everything you want to know about Orgotech.
Okay.
And then we do an Orgotech book which contradicts that. I'm okay with that. If fans prefer one version over the other, that's cool. There's more things out there for them to consume.
Then as a creator, is it one of those things where you have to avoid the community content space for fear of lifting someone else's idea? Is that a concern at all?
I prefer not to look at fan works myself, especially if it's something I'm going to be working on, just because I don't want to accidentally reuse someone's concepts. Because if you put in the hard work of creating something and then someone else uses it without, asking you or any sort of compensation, that kind of sucks. It's a lot easier with the Storyteller's Vault and Storypath Nexus and that sort of thing, because part of the whole user agreement for that is essentially the content you are putting up for sale belongs to the company because it's part of their IP. Even if someone did accidentally use one of your things, well, you've basically given them that information so that they can use it. I try not to do that anyway, for the same reason that Weird Al, for example. Weird Al is totally within his rights to do a parody of any song he wants, but he usually goes to the trouble of contacting the artist to ask them permission to do so.
And usually they say yes, because nowadays that is like the sign that you have arrived, that Weird Al, it is the musical equivalent of the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Like, Weird Al has paradised you. Congratulations, you've arrived.
Right. The only person who has ever said no, I believe, is
Coolio?
Prince. Prince directly said no. Weird Al got in touch with Coolio's people, and there was some sort of miscommunication, so Weird Al heard a yes back from his management or whatever, but Coolio himself was pissed off and irritated. They're cool now, but at the time he was upset with it, and Weird Al was like, well, I'm apologetic, but the song's already out. There's not much I can do at this point. So yeah, it's that sort of situation where I don't want to accidentally use someone's thing without asking them first, even though theoretically I could use it if I wanted to.
As a community manager and someone who at this point has been involved in RPGs for approaching 20 years.
Oh, jeez. You've just aged me 20 years.
I'm in the same boat. And this is great because I just got off a string of interviews of people that I thought were older than me, but they all turned out to be younger than me. And I think you were definitively older than me. So unless it's metric years. Yeah, you have a 400-day year in Canada, I believe, right? That way it divides equally into 100-day seasons, I think.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, just making sure. I didn't want to.
Just like creation.
It's yeah. Oh dear. That is creation with a capital C in reference to Exalted, which is I just plowed through the 3rd edition core rulebook, and I told one of the developers, I'm like, that was a pretty straightforward read, and the reply was, no one has ever said that before.
that is a first.
And I'm like,
that book is a library by itself.
Well, my response is, yeah, it was almost as big as Mage. And the person's
That's
like,
true.
Oh, okay, everything makes sense now.
Yes. Mage 20 was a hefty boy.
Yeah, that one we call the Widowmaker. The weirdest story to come out of Exalted is normally if I can't sleep, I will hold a core rulebook and pace back and forth on the ground floor of my house and keep it in one hand and just kind of do a quarter-mile walk, but my housemate noticed that my hand was shaking and I hadn't realized it was about to give out. He just yells at me, "Don't be a hero!" I'm super jazzed about sidereals, mostly because during the brief period of time where there was a connection between the Age of Sorrow and the World of Darkness, that was kind of the Mage connection, and I am personally auditioning to be the art model for the cover of sidereals. I don't know what that process is, but I will figure it out. I will be rejected, but that's not the point. The point is I tried.
On the Kickstarter, usually we have the art reference tiers, so you can pledge, I don't know, some stupid number like $200, $400, and then, submit some photos to be used as an art reference. It's been a while since we've done, you can't request specifically, I want to be the cover model.
Yeah.
That has happened a few times, but yeah, I don't think it's like that targeted thing. So you can be a sidereal, but I'm not guaranteeing you're going to be on the cover.
Well, I just assume that I'm going to be the person being beaten up by a sidereal on the inside, because whenever I look at people in Exalted, it's just kind of the same with the World of Darkness, where it is that irony that this is the World of Darkness, everyone is shitty, but no one will dead name you, everyone tries to avoid ableist language, and everyone is thin. So
yes.
In certain critical ways, the World of Darkness is vastly better than the one in which we live. And the key joke though is that I wanted to be the cover model for the Premiere Edition, where there is no cover art, it's just the Exalted script. So right. It'd be like, see that comma? I inspired that comma. So 20 years in RPGs. How have you found the notion of community in RPG to be changing over that time? And is there any place you see it going that you would like Onyx Path or even other new game developers to kind of get on board with? Like you made mention to Discord, that quite simply didn't exist 5 years ago.
Right.
Do you feel that that's changed the nature of staying in touch with your community versus just being yelled at on a forum?
There have been some arguments on the old White Wolf forums, let me tell you. I think the core of it remains the same. It's just sort of the tools that you use have changed, whether it's using forums or chats like New Bremen to talk to people on an individual basis, or using Twitter and Discord and Facebook and that sort of thing. By and large, it's the same. It's just almost like the speed of the conversation has changed. Twitter is especially, it's very much right now. It's not Facebook. You can stick up a post, people will read it like half a week later, it's fine, whatever, who cares. But Twitter has to be immediate. There was a blow up with Drive-Thru RPG over the weekend, and they couldn't really address it because they're at PAX. And people were getting so worked up because they weren't responding immediately. It's been less than a day. Let them finish their convention, get them time to, travel home, get some sleep. Just give it a minute.
Do you really want an angry Matt McElroy who's only had 7 coffees so far that day to really respond to your question? It's not going to be safe for anyone.
No.
Yeah. Least of all for Matt.
I don't want that, and I'm his friend.
Yeah. Watching the Twitter explosions periodically has proven fascinating as a fan. My heart goes out to you as a creator. For on the plus side, it's one of those things where I can read a book and literally contact the author and be like, oh, that was one of the best RPG supplements I've read in years. That was gloriously well done. Kudos to your art team. But at the same time, you can also get yelled at a speed that was hitherto unknown. I feel like the distance between the community and the writers has shrunk. And yeah. I don't know if in the long term that is healthy or not.
For a lot of creators, I think it's it's manageable, but for someone in my position, it can be a bit much. Like you said, for a while there, it was almost monthly. Some big explosion was happening, and people tweet at the Onyx Path account because they're yelling at the company, but I don't think a lot of them think that they're yelling at a person, and that person is me. And that affects me. I think I forget why I did it, but February I pretty much took off. I had someone else manage the account for almost the whole month because I just could not handle it. At that point, I hadn't really had enough time to sort of de-stress in between explosions. So when the next thing started, I just couldn't deal with it, and I had to step back for a bit.
Do you think that turns people off at all from the process of being writers, or alternatively is injurious to the community or creates like a sense of entitlement? I know periodically there have been blowups where a phrase was used or a reference was made that somebody found offensive, and I feel like authors are kind of in a tough position that say, yeah, I understand your criticism, that's not what I intended, and I don't know if I personally want to set the bar for changing my work to be that low. And then the final thing comes out and someone's like, oh, they completely ignored community feedback.
Right.
Do you think this is just kind of a teething pain, as it were, or do you think this is kind of the new normal state of play?
I think you're right in the sense that there's probably a sense of entitlement where, I've bought this thing, therefore I'm entitled to tell people what I think. Mm-hmm. And if I don't like what happened, I get to yell at everyone. And I think that's, like, I know too many people who have just left the industry entirely because there's this constant, like, you have to be perfect at all times. If you're not perfect, you get shit on. I don't know if I can say that on your podcast, but... Oh,
I've already cursed several times, but a Canadian saying shit is much more impactful, so I appreciate that.
Yes.
So,
diaper biscuits. So, yeah, people just get shit on, and it's terrible. And I wish people would try to remember, like, we're doing the best we can.
Yeah.
We're not intentionally trying to be bad people. If something slips in, we're sorry and we'll try to make it better. Like, don't assume the worst of everything just because you think we screwed up.
The lack of charity is probably what I find most concerning.
Right.
A case of, okay, this person used this or they misused this term, it's understood. And sometimes we've had cases where between the time that a book was started and a book was published, the notion of appropriateness for a particular topic has changed. And to pivot slightly, do you feel that science fiction, writing maybe a sci-fi or a historical setting, is kind of insulation against that? I think of the number of made supplements that are out now, and if we were to attempt to do them again, it would be almost impossible to do because we wouldn't have to accumulate the team that could appropriately talk about the Wulong or some other regional distinctive magical style. It would be almost impossible to assemble the expertise to do something sensitively. Not to say that it shouldn't exist. It's just, again, White Wolf. We get 2 mage books a year. Where do we want to put the wood behind those arrows? Doing a science fiction setting, has that insulated you at all? Do you feel that has allowed you to sidestep conversations that right now are very hard to do in maybe a more contemporary setting?
I don't think so, because even though it's science fiction, we're still talking about, like, it's not, say, Star Wars, for example, which takes place in a different galaxy, so we don't need to worry about, like, any real-world politics going on. We're talking about Earth. We're talking about Earth just 100 years in the future. So if we're saying, like, yes, this country is in the shithole because of the policies that have been enacted over the last century, we're still talking about real people and real polities. You still need to be sensitive about that kind of thing, and we do try to contact as many writers as we can who live in the regions that we're writing about. Well, I mean, we want verisimilitude just to make it a good supplement, but we also want to be sensitive to what's actually going on in those places.
At the same time, that's been one of the upsides of community content existing, where someone can now write a guide to the Shadowlands of Manila, where that previously would have never existed before, or something like that, from a local that is both experienced with the culture and the system.
And I think there was a vampire supplement someone did about, like, the vampires of, like, the Native American regions around the Great Lakes or something. Okay. And from what I heard, because I unfortunately have not read it, it's a fantastic supplement. It was on the bestseller list for the Storyteller's Vault for months, and it's such a niche concept. But that's the sort of thing that would never happen in like a real supplement, right?
The odds of you being able to find someone with that level of expertise who is willing to do it at a wage compared to how many copies are likely going to move is probably quite low.
Right.
So we've had a somewhat wide-ranging conversation on both the role of community, syndication tools like the wiki. Do you have any sense of where you see tabletop RPGs going?
With the internet as part of the wider conversation about social media, and particularly with the rise of things like Critical Role, people are playing online a lot more often. And not just playing online with their friends, but making it a spectator sport. And that's such a sea change in how things have been happening previously. Like 5-10 years ago, that sort of thing was almost unheard of. Like if you're watching someone else play an RPG, you're probably at a convention in a theater watching some people up on stage. But now you just sort of log on to Twitch and there's almost always someone playing something.
So one of my concerns is, as a company, it would make sense to me that Onyx Path wanted to maximize whatever avenues resulted in the most books being sold. A book that is given an equal number of books being sold, I don't know if there's a huge preference or huge changes that would be made towards a system where more people were actively playing versus one where they weren't. Again, this is literally making the assumption that an equal number of copies are sold in both cases. I fully understand that when people play books, you have word of mouth spreading, and more players are likely to get in. Do you feel that highly produced live plays are putting more butts in seats and not just selling more copies?
The impression I've gotten, I don't have the numbers to back it up, but the impression I get is that streams are good marketing, because I have constantly been, sitting watching streams for our games as well as other people's, where people come in and say, hey, what's going on? What is this? And, since I'm not on camera, I explain, this is what this is what the setting is. Okay. And hey, that sounds really interesting. And then they inquire about where to get the book. Mm-hmm. So people become interested in the games because they see them being played. And that's just not something you get. Like, it's not the same thing as word of mouth exactly, but it serves the same goals, and I think it does it with a better sort of laser focus.
I am terribly concerned as to what the conversion rate is, as it were. Like out of how many thousand people watching, how many will play? So I'm a member of a community opera company, and there's just not a lot of those running around. And there's a fair number of things that a century ago, every major city would have 2 or 3 opera companies, because there was no metropolitan that was broadcasting performances globally, where you could see the 1% of the 1% of the 1%, some of the best singers that humanity has literally ever produced. Mm-hmm. And those groups are dying, and I'm very worried that RPGs will go the same way. Probably not to the same extent. But so, for instance, are you familiar with when Wendy's released their own RPG?
Yes, I did not read it, but I heard it was entertaining.
It was surprisingly well done. Mm-hmm. And one of the first comments I heard was, people who are mad at this are mad because a social media manager did this during their spare time and they put out something better than 80% of the stuff on the market. I don't remember the exact claim, but do you think things like that do you think that help or hurt the RPG world? I
think it helps, because more people now know about RPGs than almost at any point in history. D&D 5th edition is the best-selling edition of Dungeons & Dragons.
Aside, I'm thrilled the fact that when you click on V5, it is number 273 in Amazon's category of make-believe games.
Make-believe games? That's interesting.
I just thought that was fascinating. Apologies for interjecting.
What a term.
Yeah.
There's sort of truism, and I don't know how true it is, that a rising tide
lifts all yachts.
Yeah, so I like the idea that if more people are playing, or at least aware of RPGs, more people are going to be playing our RPGs. Okay. I don't know if that's going to be the case, or if that just, like, once, they start with D&D and then never look at anything else. Mm-hmm. There's going to be plenty of people that do that. But the more the word gets out, and the more people see other games being shown, like on Twitch, if someone sees a game of Vampire, someone sees a game of Mage, someone sees a game of Scion, whatever, maybe they'll get interested. Maybe they'll want to check the book out themselves. Maybe the Twitch streamer in question has a link that automatically pops up in chat that lets them buy the book right there. I don't know. It's a tough question, and since the field is so new, I think it's hard to really say anything definitive about it. Just sort of, this is what I feel like is happening.
Okay.
And we'll just have to go on that.
You bring up a valid point, though. So people can theoretically say, we are approaching the 50th anniversary of RPGs being in existence, of proper titterpigs. But it's one of those things where, sure, cell phones existed for 30 years before we got the modern cell phone explosion. So are you then saying that you feel as if, yeah, we've been around for a while, but we're actually at the corner of the hockey stick. We're at that point where things are skyrocketing, and we still haven't quite figured out how this whole RPG thing is going to shake out in the end?
Yes, that's sort of generally how I feel things are going, because, like, when you think of card games, for example, your default assumption is not steampunk. When you go see movies, you don't by default think, oh, I'm going to see a movie, it's going to be a Western. When you think RPGs, you think medieval fantasy.
Okay.
There's going to be a point where people are going to think of RPGs more of as a general field rather than a very specific expression of that field.
Kind of like in the same way that for the longest time, if someone said computer game, once we got past the Microsoft Solitaire era, you assumed they were talking about a first-person shooter, and then later you assumed they were talking about an MMO.
Right.
Okay. And we still haven't figured that. We don't know how things are going to shake out, but you're hoping for a world where every type of RPG exists.
Optimally, I mean, we're more or less at the point where a lot of different forms of RPGs exist. It's just in sort of the global mindset. When you say RPG, people automatically think you're talking Dungeons and Dragons or one of the, Pathfinder or something similar. Mm-hmm. And I mean, it's an understandable assumption to make because it is the most popular RPG out there. But it's just sort of this weird association because that doesn't happen with other media.
Okay, and that to you is a sign that we are still early on.
I think so.
Okay, I think that is perfectly reasonable. Sorry, I didn't want to sound condescending. I just wanted to make sure that I was understanding where it was going.
Sure.
Again, this is one of those cases where you've had a varied background and probably have unique insights into where this is going or unique feelings. So the technology of RPGs has also changed over time, from miniatures as it evolved from tabletop battle simulations to games like Fiasco that don't have any storyteller in any notional way. Are there any games that you look at and say, I hope Onyx Path or even E&A Watson as a developer, I can put out a game in that vein because I think it's exploring an interesting space? Or alternatively, are there any fundamental technologies, as it were, that you think should change in games? Like, for instance, some games quite simply don't have levels. Mage was innovative because it didn't have spells. Are there any technologies that you see that are developing, or any forms of the RPG that are developing that you would like to see Onyx Path or yourself as a developer dip a toe into?
You know what? For me personally, I'm comfortable with sort of the traditional RPG. The Trinity Continuum it's like as non-standard an RPG as you can get while still being a traditional RPG.
What makes it non-standard? Sorry.
Building on things like fate aspects, for example. Like incorporating a lot of those newer sort of narrative concepts, but putting them in more of a traditional RPG format.
Okay. And for our audience, what is a fate aspect?
The crew that put together the Storypath system, they referenced a lot of newer RPGs that strip RPGs down to their core concepts and mess with them. Stuff like Fate, stuff like Fiasco, stuff like Dread, and sort of took a lot of those concepts and tweaks and tried to incorporate them into what is basically just sort of the next step on the evolution of the storyteller system, which is more your traditional RPG. So if you've got someone who's familiar with RPGs, they can sort of step into the Storypath system and still feel comfortable that they know more or less what's going on and not have to unlearn or learn divergent concepts like you would with a lot of the other narrative RPGs in the space.
Okay.
So I'm comfortable in that more traditional RPG space. I love the fact that people are doing different and newer things, and I want to see the industry as a whole explore that space and see what we can do with it. But in terms of what I want to develop, I'm getting old. I'll leave the advancements to the kids.
As an actuary, you're not even halfway there, and I speak that with confidence, unless you have a history of heart disease or a chronic condition I don't know about, in which case that was a terribly heartless statement of mine.
You know what? My hair has been going gray for 15 years now, so...
Oh, you'll be fine. Who do you think is doing any interesting work in coming up with novel ways to present or develop settings that you think could be inspiring to a storyteller who is used to traditional things where, okay, here's a book, here's a list of location, here's a list of characters? Do you feel the mechanics or methods of conveying setting have changed over time? And if so, is there anything you think people should be looking at?
I think by and large, things have changed in terms of what is the optimal book layout in order to sort of deliver this information. But people are playing a lot more with the capabilities of, for example, the PDF format.
Okay.
We just released our first couple of phone PDFs, for example. So it's a different form factor. Everyone's got a phone, and you've probably got one at the table while you're playing, so you can quickly look stuff up on your phone, even though it's a full rulebook. It's formatted for your phone. And that's just a minor tweak to formatting. In the Trinity Continuum PDF, the Aeon PDF specifically, we've got a few embedded videos.
Oh, interesting.
Which is not something we've done before.
Are those in-world videos?
Yes.
Okay. So that's from like the Aeon News Network or something like that, or NBang, whatever that thing was called when I flipped through Aberrant.
It's a few messages from 3 of the proxies, just delivering, like it's a little hologram delivering some sort of cryptic message, just something thematic for people to enjoy. Initially, it was just sort of something fun and engaging for the Kickstarter, but we decided to incorporate it into the book. I believe that Post-Human Studios is doing some interesting things with embedding content in their PDFs for Eclipse Phase as well. So just sort of exploring what it means to have a book. If the book is presented in digital format, you can do different things with it instead of just being a digital version of a physical book.
Okay, so the presentation of the games has been changing over time, and we're still in an experimental phase there. Thank you so much for your time. We have had a very wide-ranging conversation on the state of RPGs and where things are going. If people are curious to follow your future work, where can they do so?
I can be found all over the Onyx Path social media. If you're contacting Onyx Path, that's usually me. And Onyx Path social media is the Onyx Path. So that's like on Twitter.
On pretty well
Onyx
everything,
Path. Yeah, theonyxpath.com, facebook.com/theonyxpath. Me personally, my Twitter is Von Aether, VONAETHER. And I have a Facebook page that is Ian A. Watson, as one word, .creative.
Nice. Ian A. Watson, thank you so much for your time.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
Oh, gladly. And again, information on the Wiki Update event are in the show notes as well as in the Discord, discord.me/matesthepodcast, and an event notice is also on Facebook, also linked in the show notes. You've been listening to Mates of the Podcast. You can subscribe to our show on Spotify, Anchor, TuneIn, iTunes, Google Play Podcasts, or the podcatcher of your choice through the RSS on our webpage. If you like us, please give us a review on the platform of your choosing. We have a hopping Discord community, as I've mentioned several times, at discord.me/matesthepodcast. You can also give us your thoughts and feedback at matesthepodcast@gmail.com or on Twitter @matesthepodcast. If you'd like to support us and get a cool chat color in Discord, go to matesthepodcast.com and click on Become a Supporter of Mates the Podcast. Executive producers just got a preview of the episode plan for the next 2 months, or at least what it looks like now, as well as my favorite chocolate chip cookie recipe. This episode is made possible from the support of our executive producers, Brendan, Andrew, John Magnuson, Justin, Bill C., Anders, Michael Parker, Richard Bat Brewster, and Bryce Perry. Also, go to matesthepodcast.com for show notes and all our previous shows. Thanks. Bye.